You're very welcome to today's webinar called Welcoming Classrooms, Promoting and Supporting the Integration and Wellbeing of Refugee Children in Schools. We're delighted to have you all with us for this important discussion, and I'm especially grateful to receive support and input this afternoon from our invited guests, Mandy Mesham and Catherine Gladwell, both of whom I'll introduce in greater detail in a few minutes. My name is Patrick O'Dowd, and I'm the Director of Caritas Diocese of Salford, which is the Catholic charity working to support people experiencing various challenges in Greater Manchester and Lancashire. I'm also privileged to be the chair of the Migration Alliance within the Caritas Social Action Network, and also known as CSAN. And CSAN is an agency of the Catholic Bishops' Conference in England and Wales, and seeks to animate and support the various different Catholic charities and agencies across the country as they support people experiencing poverty and seeking to raise our voices on matters of public policy. The Alliance in particular seeks to promote collaboration and action between Catholic agencies, including a particular focus on supporting refugees and migrants across England and Wales. And today, our focus is on the crucial role that schools can play in the lives of refugees and children seeking asylum. As I say, we're very privileged to be joined by Mandy and Catherine, who I'm really excited to hear from this afternoon, who have great knowledge and experience in the field. Catherine is the Chief Executive of Refugee Education UK, and Mandy Mesham is a school leader from Salford Diocese who's been involved in providing practical support to children in their communities. And their insights and experiences will help us explore effective strategies for supporting children as they navigate new educational environments. This webinar actually originates from the direct outreach by schools within Salford Diocese to the Caritas School Service based in Salford Diocese, which provides social work, counselling and support to people in school settings and supporting families and children in various circumstances. The schools in our area that covers Greater Manchester and Lancashire reached out to Caritas seeking urgent guidance and support when they were faced with the sudden arrival of large groups of children living in emergency temporary accommodation, typically hotels. These children from diverse nationalities and backgrounds had not been enrolled in schools for a significant time, and this presented serious challenges, not only to their ability to learn and thrive, but was accompanied by serious technical challenges for the schools around the enrolment processes, securing the correct funding and other resources. The situation highlighted the urgent need for a more coordinated response and the sharing of best practices across our education and support networks. And so today's event is also intended to contribute to Caritas Network's wider engagement for World Day of Migrants and Refugees 2024, which is to be commemorated this coming Sunday, the 29th of September. The theme of World Day of Migrants and Refugees this year is God walks with his people. And in the special message for this day, Pope Francis reminds Catholics and all people of goodwill that we're called to walk alongside those who are migrating, offering support, compassion and understanding. For refugee children, this journey involves not only finding safety, but also a place to learn, grow and thrive in their new environments. As a diocesan Caritas agency, our response is firmly rooted in the social teachings of the Catholic Church, reflecting the principles outlined in the recently published document, Love the Stranger, by the Catholic Bishops' Conference of England and Wales. Today's session is dedicated to sharing the practical challenges faced by schools and exploring possible solutions in line with what Pope Francis has repeatedly described the mission of welcoming, protecting, promoting and integrating refugees and people seeking asylum. And we hope that through these discussions like today's webinar, we can all leave better equipped to support vulnerable children in our communities. Throughout the session this afternoon, please feel free to raise any questions in the chat, which we'll address at the end of the session. This is being recorded, so you'll be able to access again online if you can't stay for the full webinar. And we encourage everybody to follow the conversation on social media using the hashtag welcoming classrooms. Get my words out today. Hashtag welcoming classrooms. And we'll be sending out some information after the session with links to resources referred to during the course of the session. Once again, thank you very much for joining us, and let's get started. So without further ado, I'm really pleased that we can introduce to you Mandy Mesham, the head teacher at St Ethelbert's Roman Catholic Primary School in Bolton. Mandy's worked in St Ethelbert since 1987 and has been head teacher there since 2007, and is passionate about Catholic education and ensuring that her school is inclusive and welcoming to all. She's proud of the work they've done to meet the needs of children over many years, but particularly in these changing and challenging times. So Mandy, without further ado, if I can hand over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you. I'm really pleased that I've been able to come and speak with you this afternoon. I'm not pretending to be the expert on all things migration and refugees and so on, but I do believe that we have a lot to offer in terms of the challenges that we've had to face and the strategies and the solutions we've tried to put in place, and we try to put in place every day. So as Patrick said, I've worked at St Ethelbert since 1987 as a probationary teacher. That's how old I am. Not an NQT, a probationer, and I've been head teacher since 2007. And in those many years, I've seen huge change, but then humongous change, enormous change in the last 5 to 10 years. Just a bit of context for our school. In 2004, just before the Faith School Places legislation came on board, we had 100% baptised Catholic children, more than 90% white British, more than 90% children who were native English speakers. And we had 100%, as recently as 2016, we had 100% stability, i.e. the children who joined us in reception left us in year 6, and that was how it was, but no longer. Sorry, Patrick, could you change the slide?
Yeah, apologies, there's a little delay there.
Thank you.
Let's jump back, forgive me.
Quite all right, don't worry.
There you go, that moved on.
So this is our context now. We've got an average sized primary school. We've got 220 pupils, including a nursery. And we're situated in a really diverse area of Bolton. And in our school at the moment, we currently have 29 different languages, just under 60% EAL. Now we only have 21% baptised Catholics, 17% SEND, 29% PPG. And at the moment on roll, although that's changed this week since I wrote these slides, because we've had 12 new children just this week. We've got 17% international new arrivals, including 10% asylum seekers and refugees. And a piece of work we did when we had the pandemic, we've got 20% of our families live in accommodation with more than 6 people. We found that we've got so many families living with 10, 12, upwards to 15 people living in one home. So that's a piece of work we did during COVID. And the biggest challenge we have of all of this is we have extremely high mobility, which causes lots of challenges for my staff and governors and leaders. I don't intend to read that whole slide, but you can see there we've got a very high proportion of children who live in really deprived areas. This area of Bolton is very deprived. There are pockets that aren't, but most of our children live in deprivation, including obviously the children who come and join us from overseas. So why Bolton and why St Ethelbert's? Well, Bolton, as many Greater Manchester local authorities, were part of the government's Gateway Protection Programme back in the day. And we have a large influx of refugees from Southeast Asia, Middle East, and different parts of Africa. And in Bolton, there have already been established communities from Pakistan and India for many, many years, but more and more people are coming to join those established communities. And there are also new communities that have come into our school. These are just a few of them, from Eritrea, Afghanistan, Iran, Nigeria, Somalia, so many places in Africa. And those communities are in our school and are now establishing themselves in Bolton, because obviously these people want shops that they're familiar with and cafes and restaurants. So our local community has really changed and is really diverse. Where our school is in, as I say, an area of high deprivation. So there's lots and lots of social housing, usually run by private landlords in this area. And that's really used very often for our refugee families, hotels as well, as Patrick said before, but we do have a lot of social housing in this area. And we find, obviously, it's much cheaper than London. So it means that families who may have been refugees and been placed in London, or asylum seekers and placed in London, after a while, when they're able to move up here where the established communities are, because it's cheaper and there are communities that they can talk to, that they can join, and so on. So that's why St Ethelbert's is in the middle of all of this, as are many schools in Bolton. So this brings challenges for the school, and I'm not pretending that this doesn't happen. Massive for us, our attainment outcomes are really low. We are well below national average. Some of the children who come to us in years 5 and 6 don't count towards end of Key Stage 2 SATs, for example, but we have so many who come throughout school, particularly in year 4, that this does affect our attainment outcomes and our achievement outcomes. So clearly for us, that's a real pressure. And in turn, trying to get those children to get as close as they can to national outcomes, that puts great pressures on our staffing. We've got a high proportion of staff who work with different sorts of children, SEN children, children of lower ability, children with disabilities. And then, of course, we've got this influx of children coming to us from overseas with different issues as well. So massive pressures on our staffing, which in turn brings huge pressures on our budget. There is not finite money for staffing. And in many schools, there are redundancies being made. And I worry about that day when that will happen, because I don't know how we're going to meet the needs of all our children if our budgets carry on as they are. But I think the biggest frustration, and it is a frustration for us, is the instances of high mobility in our school, because we put into place so many things to help the children, to help them settle, to help them get good progress across the curriculum and so on, and supporting our families. And we just get there with them and they make great progress, and then they moved on, and new children fill that space, and we have to start all over again. And that's our job. I know it's our job, but it's a real frustration for myself and for the staff. And also the time that we have to spend supporting families, the parents of these children. We do spend a lot of time doing that, and that is, just part of our job. So those are challenges, and I sound like I'm moaning. I'm really not moaning, because I've put "but" there. Those are the challenges, but then there's this next bit, which to us is what we do. And it's this: speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. That's what our school is about. That's what Catholic education is about. And I feel that very passionately. And then I've got another quote on the next slide that speaks volumes for what we're trying to do in our schools. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. And that's what we're about. So when I'm moaning about all those things, the challenges that we have, that's what we've got to keep at the centre of our work. That's what we're meant to do in our schools. So to me, the most important thing that we do is that importance of welcome. We are very fortunate in Bolton that we have a service called Bolton ACES, which is the Achievement Cohesion Integration Service in Bolton. They've been running a long time, and they're a service that support families who are new to Bolton from abroad, and pupils who are in EAL, who've never been in a British school before. And hopefully we would have more support from them. We get some support, but at least it's something. And I'm aware that in many areas, they probably don't have that. So when an admission date is agreed, ACES do an initial assessment for the children, which helps us greatly to be able to meet their needs as soon as they come into school. And then we organise an integration meeting. And this is such an important strategy that we use. I'm sure this happens in many other schools, but I feel we've got it off to a fine art now. In that meeting, We talk about all the practical issues of uniform and start date, school meals. We give them a tour of the school. But the most important thing for me is the warm welcome from all my staff and children. So when I or other members of staff are taking these families around our school to show them what's happening, without exception, and I can say that very proudly, any member of staff or child who's walking down that corridor will stop and speak to the family. They might not be able to make themselves understood, but they will do that. They will say hello, they will say welcome and talk to them and say, oh, I'm in your class, and so on. And that for me is absolutely vital for these children. And it happens so often, as I said, we've got so many new children coming in each week that our children especially are very used to this and do this. And I do feel that the new children are made to feel really special and hopefully immediately made to feel part of our community, because it must be so difficult for them. And we do have challenges, obviously. So clearly, I said it before, we've got 29 languages. We do have a Polish member of staff on school, and we have an Urdu Gujarati speaking member of staff on school, but that's only 3 languages. All the rest we have to sort of get by, really. So language barriers, obviously, is a clear barrier, but also a lack of understanding of our education system is really difficult for some of our families. They just don't get it at all. Uniform, including the cost of uniform, which we do address. They have worries about school meals, particularly if they're Muslim families in particular. They worry about halal, they worry about what sort of provision there is for school meals. A massive one for us is the issue of siblings in different schools. We have in a number of occasions gone over our published admission number to keep siblings together, but there comes a point where we can't do that because our classrooms have got a finite floor space and we can't always do that. So very often for a lot of our children, 2 siblings, for example, might be in this school and another sibling 1.5 miles, 2 miles away. So that's a huge issue, obviously, for transport, for getting to school on time. So we try our very best to accommodate that. Sometimes there are worries about being put into a faith school. Very often it's not their choice. They've been put here because there's a space and it's nearby their home. So there are worries about that we have to overcome. And most often at the moment that we're finding, a lot of the children coming have SEND issues. So there are all of those barriers to overcome. So we have a clear induction checklist, we have a pack, we use photographs, we try to translate wherever possible, family friends come along, we've got staff members, as I say, and we try our very best to get ourselves understood. And we must do a good job in that because people turn up on the right day with the right things, so we must do a good job. In terms of the siblings in different schools, we try to, in agreement with other schools, have flexible start and finish times for as long as that's needed, so that families aren't put under pressure and don't say, well, I'm not bringing them to school at all. We want them to be here. So that's what we do in that regard. And we have lots and lots of really good quality, good as new uniform that our other families donate. And we're able to provide uniform for all of those families that need it. As governors and now as a trust, we're part of St Teresa of Calcutta Academy Trust now. These are the strategies as a school that we put in place to get the best outcomes for our children. So we do have, despite the budget pressures that I talked about before, a very high proportion of support staff across the school. We've got 2 teaching assistants who are employed to deliver interventions for all our international new arrivals, whether they be refugees, asylum seekers, economic migrants. So those children from day 1 get daily phonics, daily reading and writing, daily conversation and vocabulary development. And if they're from countries such as Nigeria, for example, that will be a very short intervention. Other children who have 0 English will need a lot longer. And basically what we want to do is enable children to be able to access the curriculum as quickly as possible so that they can be part of the class. It doesn't mean to say that they're withdrawn completely, they're not, but they have that intervention every day until it's no longer needed, and then new children are coming all the time to fill those spaces.
Man, I'm just going to pause us there for a second, just while we swap from Alex to Carl as interpreter and allow Alia to spotlight Carl, if that's okay. So thanks, Mandy. I'm going to move on for the next slide.
Thank you. We also have nurture provision for the younger children who come from overseas. And these two groups that I'm going to say now are Rainbows and our Sunbeams groups, which originally were set up for children who were bereaved and so on. Our staff are trained in that. We've got a number of staff trained in delivering those programmes. We're now finding that for some of our children who've come refugees or asylum seekers who were suffering loss and separation and anxiety, they can join those groups too. So a group that was set up for other reasons has now really helped with our refugee children. We're part of a mental health hub, and we give those children as well a safe space to talk and express themselves if needed to. As I said before, we've got SEND children who are coming from overseas, quite a number with very, very severe autism. And so we obviously have to help in that regard, which is difficult very often with the language barrier. So we're investing in a diagnostic programme for pupils with EAL that will help us to separate the EALness of those children from the SEND issues that they might have, so that we're offering the correct support from the very outset for those children. So the positive outcomes that we've got, our children settle really, really well and make new friends very, very quickly. And that's because the rest of our children are used to this sort of revolving door of people coming into our school, and they're very, very welcoming. The children pick up the rules and expectations really quickly, and they make rapid progress in picking up conversational English. Some of them are never going to reach, depending on when they come into school, the expected standard in reading, writing and maths, but they can manage in our school, and that to us is a success. They have access to the curriculum and make really good progress. And another thing I'm really proud of is that a lot of our refugee children become part of our gift team, become pupil chaplains. We've had some of our children become Caritas ambassadors. They like to join the choir. We've got one little boy who joined our sports club and has been picked up by Everton Football Club, for example, because of his skill in football. So without those opportunities, those children, it's great that they're able to have success in different ways. And all our clubs are free to those targeted families, so that if we can find a talent, we can sort of nurture it and signpost our families to different organisations that can help them. As I said before, our families, I'm sure this happens in lots of schools, meeting the needs of our families is more or less a full-time job. We have our food bank. We have great links with St Vincent de Paul Society in our parish, who provide us with food parcels for our families. We've got a friend of the school who is very, very generous, particularly around Christmas time, with regards to providing things for families that need. And we have staff donations. Our staff donate all sorts of things in terms of food. Clothing, we have, as I said, the uniform, but we collect shoes that are in good condition, obviously. We have generous donations of clothes for babies, for children, for adults. And every year we have a winter coat collection that we do with our parish, that we're able to provide winter coats to all those families that need them. Very often, as I said, it's social housing that these families are put in, and it's not always the best. Let's face it, it isn't always the best. So we try and help families to improve the home conditions. We've sourced household goods, curtains, vacuum cleaners, bedding, mattresses, all those things that people need for their homes. We've sourced it through charities, friends of the school, and staff donations. And also we've used the Bishop's Fund on occasion, which is obviously part of Salford Diocese provision, to provide things for families, but also for transport when people are moved from their homes to hotels, for example, and still have to get the children to school. We've been able to provide funding for transport so that the children can still be stable, at least they're stable in school if they're not stable in the home life. We do a lot of advocacy work, so we've done some stuff with the Home Office, between parents and Home Office when they've got issues there. We've set up English classes for parents. Sadly, we have to deal with a lot of domestic abuse, which is sad, but we deal with that as well. We've helped parents when they're finally able to get benefits in sorting those out for them and other money issues. They bring their letters to us to translate and for us to support them. And we also signpost them to organisations such as Citizens Advice, in Bolton, the Destitution Project, and BRASS, which is befriending refugees and asylum seekers. And those organisations are fantastic at being able to support these families. And then we have special items that, again, our generous benefactor who collects things all year from different companies and so on, we're able to give Christmas presents to all these families. And the St Vincent de Paul Society took them on holiday as well. So we're very, very fortunate that we've sourced many people to support us in our work. And this final slide is, as school communities, what we do for our children and families is just a step along the way. And as Oscar Romero said, we cannot do everything. And there is a sense of liberation in really realising that. This enables us to do something and to do it well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning and a step along the way. And I really believe that at least we're doing something, and hopefully we are changing the lives. The strapline of our trust, St Teresa of Calcutta, is making Christ known, making lives better. And I hope that at St Ethelbert's, that's what we're doing. Thank you.
Mandy, thanks very much for that really, really insightful presentation there about your experience. And actually, I think what's most staggering about it is that as a school community, you go above and beyond the situation of actually providing just educational support, but there's a broader aspect of the wraparound social support that's there for the school as well. So I'm really grateful to Mandy for input, and also she's going to stay with us to be able to answer some questions. And I know that we've already got a question in the Q&A bar. If you do have any questions throughout, please don't hesitate to paste them in there, and we'll hopefully have time to come back to them all at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce now Catherine Gladwell, the Chief Executive and Founder of Refugee Education UK. We're really thrilled that she's able to be with us this afternoon. Refugee Education UK works across the country, equipping refugee children and young people to access and thrive in education. And each year they work with several thousand young people through their own direct frontline educational support and advice programmes, support several hundred schools, further education colleges and universities, conduct research and influence policy, which is where we came across Catherine's work first of all when trying to examine issues around this particular challenge. Alongside Catherine's work at Refugee Education UK, she's a Director and Research Advisor for Jigsaw Education, where she specialises in international refugee education. Catherine has led and consulted on refugee education research and programmes for international agencies, including UNICEF, the UNHCR, Save the Children, and many others. And she holds degrees from Oxford University and the University of London, and is an Honorary Research Fellow at the University of Winchester, an Honorary Associate Professor of Refugee Education at the University of Nottingham. Catherine's going to outline for us now some themes around understanding the nature and extent of the challenges refugee children face in the education system, and she'll share some of the findings from her research in policy and practice that could lead to better educational outcomes for young refugees, as well as signposting us to some exciting new professional development resources. Without further ado, Catherine, it's great to have you with us in this webinar. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Patrick. I have to say that I got so engrossed in listening to Mandy that I kind of forgot that I have to actually speak myself. And I'm not sure if you can see me, but I'm smiling because thank you, Mandy, just so much. I feel incredibly inspired and moved listening to you speak. I also felt like I was listening to the head teacher of my 7-year-old daughter's school, who is that head teacher is one of the people I respect most in the world. So thank you so much for everything that you just shared. It was wonderful. I don't want to assume that those of you on this call are necessarily familiar with Refugee Education UK. As Patrick has kind of outlined already, we basically do what it says on the tin. We know that war and dangerous journeys to safety force refugee children out of school, and that takes away one of the critical building blocks for their futures. We don't think that that's right. So we work to improve education access, which for us is essentially doing everything we can through a whole range of different frontline programmes to get children into school as quickly as possible when they arrive in the UK, and that's from primary school all the way through up to university. And then to be able to thrive once they're there. And that means looking at better academic and psychosocial outcomes for refugee and asylum seeking children and young people. And then finally, looking at change and what does it mean to see change within the education system. I think we have seen our frontline waiting lists increase quite significantly over the last few years. And so we also invest in looking at how we can change policies or contribute, make a small contribution to the changing of policies and practices that might mean that perhaps in 10 years' time, the work of organisations like us isn't quite as needed as it is today. We also work from a Christian ethos. As Mandy was sharing, that's really foundational to how we work. We have a deeply held belief in hope, and for us, education is a tangible outworking of this. So we found that education is one of the only forward-looking things in the lives of the refugee and asylum-seeking children that we work with. So they will often have to look back to the past if they're talking to a solicitor or a counsellor or a social worker. And yet when they get to go to school, they're engaging with something that is building for a future. And so for us, investing in education sends a really clear message that there is a more hopeful future that is possible, and that's a future worth investing in. And so everything that we do is in some way, shape or form trying to make a small contribution towards that. So next, here we are, wonderful. What we're going to look at today is how we can create a better education system for refugee children. So firstly, for accessing education, and secondly, for the actual outcomes from education. What are the current challenges and what needs to change? So I mentioned earlier that listening to Mandy made me think of the head teacher of my daughter's primary school. She goes to Church of England primary school in a deprived area of inner London, and it has many sort of comparable stats and similar challenges to the ones that Mandy so articulately outlined, and she just loves it. I dropped her off this morning, and as per usual, she wanted to get there before the gate opened. They have like a big gate and then a drive that kind of not a drive for cars, but it's a big stretch of concrete that goes up to the playground, and she presses up to the gate, and all of the kids want to kind of be the first one in as the gate opens, and then they race up because they can't wait to get into school. And for me, that is a vision of what education can be. And what it should be. But so many refugee children and young people don't go to schools like my daughter's or Mandy's, and are denied that opportunity. Next slide, please. So half of the world's refugee children are out of school, but even for those who arrive in the UK, they face waits of up to a year for school places, and particularly it's challenging at the upper secondary level. And then unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, once they've got into school, typically are 3 years behind their non-migrant peers at GCSE level, and refugee and asylum-seeking children in families, that attainment gap is reduced, but it is still significant. So that is bad enough, but the barriers to education then continue to accumulate and layer up as young refugees and asylum seekers progress through the education system, with particularly complex eligibility issues at the further and higher education stages. That's another talk. We're not going to go into that today, but you can contact us if you're particularly interested in progression. So despite this, there's no overarching national policy framework for the integration of refugee learners into the UK education system. Many other countries have this, we don't. and funding for English language learning, which is clearly a critical component. It's been cut by about 60% in the last decade for schools across the UK, and that's so many schools that we work with are devastated by that and are struggling to provide the support that they know the children within their walls need. So, next slide, please. Thank you. What is actually stopping refugee and asylum-seeking children getting into education in the UK right now? Next slide. Because something is stopping them from getting in.
Kath, I'm just going to pause for a second if that's okay, because we're just going to swap back to Alex if that's all right.
Yeah,
So Alex, when you're ready, and Alia will just swap over to spotlight the video. Thank you. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks, Alex. So something is stopping refugee and asylum-seeking children from getting into education. Freedom of information data from research that we carried out for UNICEF UK a couple of years ago showed that for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, not a single region of the UK had met the 20-day target from the point of taking a child into care to getting them into education. Large numbers waiting over 3 months is not unusual. We also meet children who've waited 9 months, who've waited up to a year. Our most recent research, which we just published on Monday, was carried out in partnership with the Bell Foundation. We found that for late arrivals, and particularly those who arrive into the UK education system at upper secondary and year 11 in particular, can wait up to a year. And that time spent waiting was described by young people in that situation as a no man's land. Next slide, please. Thank you. So 3 key barriers to access that have come out from our data. The first one is funding structures. So lots of the children arrive late in the year. Obviously, you don't time your arrival in the UK for the start of the academic term if you're fleeing conflict. And so we have lots of children across the country arriving after the October cutoff for funding. So this is a contributing factor to schools not being able to get the additional resources that they need to really support these children. Uplift funding was introduced, but only for certain categories of refugee children, so Ukrainian children and children on particular resettlement schemes from Afghanistan. So that, again, kind of it makes it very difficult for schools when they are asked in May, for example, to take a group of new children or to admit suddenly to actually be able to have the resources to do that. In addition to that, Mandy, you talked, very compellingly and honestly about the impact on your attainment data, and that's a very real thing. And again, in secondary schools in particular, we see that when students are arriving within the lead up to GCSEs, there's a real fear that results profiles will be affected, and that leads to a reluctance to admit. However, there are policy provisions that mean that new arrivals that arrive in year 10 or 11 who don't have English as a first language don't have to be included in those results profiles. But we find that the level of awareness about that provision in schools across the country is actually surprisingly low. Perhaps everyone on this call is in the minority of schools that know all about that, but we find that that's a barrier that unfortunately doesn't need to be a barrier. Thirdly and finally, multiple practical and mental health challenges. So from complex online admission systems that parents with little English or computer literacy and without access to the internet have to navigate, living in overcrowded temporary accommodation, and of course navigating significant cultural dislocation, grief and trauma. And all of these things combine to make even getting through the door of a school, whether it's primary or secondary or at the higher levels, a challenge. And next, yes, we're here already, wonderful. So then what? What about the children who have finally got into education? I think we know that inclusion doesn't stop there, and that refugee children do then continue to face barriers to thriving. If we could pop to the next one, thank you. Yeah, we'll get them all up at once. There's five most significant barriers that have come out from our data, and this is kind of multiple research projects combined, plus sort of grey literature from about 10 years of casework with schools and children and young people. So the first one is the impact of dispersal and other accommodation challenges. And Mandy mentioned the frustrations of high mobility. So a lot of the refugee and asylum seeking children that we work with are placed in initial asylum accommodation of various forms. So they have an initial wait to get into school when they arrive in the UK. Sometimes it's not even attempted to get them into school because a move is anticipated. Often that move can then take a lot longer than is thought. And so that gap of, we won't put them into school because they're going to be moving in a few weeks, actually lasts a few months. And then the waiting game obviously starts again when children move and are trying to get into a school in a new location. Moves can then take place again at further points in the education system, and education disruption is not currently considered in dispersal planning, except immediately prior to key exams. Secondly, trauma and mental health. So we see young people who are not able to function in the classroom and so sort of withdraw from school. We also see a kind of exclusion that is sometimes imposed upon young people and who are actually excluded by the institution because of high absences and recurrent lateness. But actually, when we dig under the surface, we find that actually that links back to things like insomnia as a result of trauma and mental health, that it's meaning they're not going to sleep until the early hours of the morning, and then that's leading to high absences and recurrent lateness. But all of this combining to mean that trauma and mental health challenges are leading to sort of self-withdrawal and institutional exclusions. Thirdly, lack of intensive language support. We've mentioned the huge decline in support available for EAL provision across the country. It's been effectively dismantled in many schools. I mentioned earlier my daughter's school, which has a very, very high proportion of children with English as an additional language, and yet has no dedicated EAL provision available to them. They do a fantastic job with what they do have in terms of kind of blocking in things around the edges of other teachers' roles, but there's no dedicated provision, and that's actually very normal for what we see across the majority of schools that we work with. Finally, or fourthly rather, subject-specific curriculum gaps for late arrivals. So those who arrive slightly older in the education system, not only trying to boost their English literacy and numeracy, but also needing to gain subject-specific knowledge, and particularly at Key Stage 4. This is one of the most common reasons that schools reach out to us, that they're really stuck preparing kids for specific exams and need a sort of injection of additional support in that time. Finally, we see pressure to work to pay off people smugglers and the debts associated with that, at times more coercive trafficking relationships and other forms of exploitation, and gang recruitment, again, preventing children from thriving even though they have enrolled in school. Again, that's a kind of entire separate training, but it is worth a nod to. So, as we kind of come into land, what can we do? What needs to change in order to see things get better? And we are really convinced that it can change. Some of the changes are practical and some of them are policy level. In terms of practical interventions for supporting children, which is on the next slide, if we can just ping them all up, but I'm not going to talk at length about these kind of institutional level solutions, simply because I think Mandy's done such an exceptional job of outlining so many practical things that individual schools can do. I'd like to leave some time for questions. I think the thing that I'll just pull out from here would be peer support. And again, in a context of very limited resources, one of the things that we've seen multiple schools that we've worked with introduce buddy schemes for new arrivals, whether that's with children who have also arrived from another country a couple of years previously, or who have a shared language, or just children who are friendly and outgoing and will kind of be able to go and welcome a new child and help them to integrate and make friends. That's been a really successful, really simple intervention. In terms of period of adjustment, which is another one just to mention, having an awareness that there's this concrete time when children start, when they've just been through a lot of changes, and trying to keep that period of adjustment as stable as possible for them. And so recognizing that a school is trying to balance like feeling their way and working out what's going to work for that child, and that might lead to a sort of an iterative approach with lots of changes, but also wanting to create a context of stability and nurture, so limiting timetable changes, limiting like huge numbers of different staff that they might be exposed to all at once. We found that those things can also be really helpful. And I think the other things we've Mandy has touched on really well, so we'll skip to the next slide if that's okay, which is more about the changes that we'd like to see at a slightly bigger picture. So thinking about the three categories that I said we work across at the start, in terms of access to education, we would really like to see removal of the October funding cut-off and allocation of uplift funding for all refugee and asylum-seeking children. It's really clear that schools, or the majority of schools that we work with anyway, they want to support children as best they can. They're really constrained in what's available to help them do that. Secondly, within the access category, we'd like to see really clear information for schools about results profiles at Key Stage 4, so that it's not just a kind of subclause buried at the bottom of a document as it is at the moment, but that it's really clear for schools. Admissions support for parents and clear and coordinated processes around in-year arrivals. In terms of the thriving category, we would really like to see education disruption a consideration in dispersal decisions. So when children are moved from one lot of accommodation in one place to another, and where that does still have to take place, because sometimes it does, we'd like to see advance notice provided both to the school that is losing the student so that they can prepare them for that move, and to the school that is, or to the schools or the local authority in the area where they're going to be going, so that efforts can be made in advance of the move to find a new school, and links can be made between the old school and the new school for that transition to be made as smooth as possible. Of course, I think it goes without saying that that reduction in EAL support, we'd really like to see that reversed. And almost every single school that we work with says they need more English language support and more resources for mental health support. And we're really looking forward to seeing what the new government sort of wellbeing for children, new papers that are coming out at the moment might include as a nod towards those things, or a step towards improving that, and to kind of watch this space on that. We'd also like to see more learning from other contexts. So again, thinking, I'm kind of picking out some of the examples that relate more to secondary school, because Mandy's done such a wonderful job of talking about the primary level. But at the secondary school level, there's a lot of great learning from other contexts around accelerated learning and condensed curricula, that's particularly useful when children are needing to hit particular targets or get through key exams. There's some really great examples of emerging work in that space here in the UK that's drawn from learning in other contexts, and I think I'd love to see that more widespread. In terms of changing the landscape, we'd like to see the policy framework and implementation guidelines that don't currently exist. We're in the process of trying to draft some of those. We haven't been officially asked to draft them, but we are pretty convinced that we know what they should include, and we're going to draft them and see if we can present them to decision makers and see what they think, if this is something where there is actually scope for taking some steps forward in the context of the current things that are happening in government. And finally, in changing the landscape, I think it's really important that teachers and other education professionals are as well as equipped as they can be in terms of training for staff. And I think we can, as RE UK, make a small contribution in this area. If you flick onto the next slide, you'll see a QR code that can be scanned, which would enable you to join our Education Professionals Network. It's a free network that we've just launched. If you join this network, you'll get access to some free online asynchronous sort of study at your own pace training that was developed with us and the University of Nottingham, that goes through all kinds of different aspects of supporting refugee children in school, from access to mental health, to English language, to subject-specific learning, to progression, to onwards opportunities. So you'll have access to that. You'll also get regular, accessible, bite-sized research findings and evidence about what works in refugee education, that's been particularly prepared so that you don't have to read the actual research papers yourselves. We know that teachers are incredibly busy and overstretched, so you can just get the bite-sized, what does this mean for the classroom findings, and also access to peer support sessions with experts from our team and further afield, and again thematically organised on specific elements of supporting refugee children in schools and in FE colleges. We also have a whole range of more in-depth training sessions on our website that you can book into as well. So I hope that you will keep in touch with us over the course of this year and the years to come. Next slide, please. If you do want to just learn more, there's a documentary that is it's just about, I think I did check the other day and it was still there, despite saying available for 11 months from 2022. It was still there the other day, but hopefully there'll be our England From Conflict to Classroom documentary is still available on BBC iPlayer, which follows a number of young people, young refugees that we've worked with on that journey, and shows the importance of education for them. And then final slide, you can keep in touch with us in all of the normal ways that you can see here. And we really do believe that a more inclusive education system for young refugees is possible and is achievable. And thank you for your time in listening today. And it's been really encouraging for me to hear the examples of St Ethelbert's, and I can only imagine that they're replicated in many of the schools represented in this community. Thank you very much.
Catherine, thanks very much for your input there. I really appreciate it. And if you haven't read any of Catherine's reports, while she might have made them into bite-sized chunks for people to access, they are very accessible themselves as well, with a great amount of learning in there too. From our own experience in Caritas Salford, accessing the materials that Catherine and her team have put together has been really, really valuable in trying to support and accompany schools and school leaders and teachers in the journey of some challenging circumstances of navigating. As a person who's not from the education sector, the October date struck me always as an arbitrary sort of unnecessary complication. So the fact that you've added in there, Catherine, for us as well, some policy things, I think my colleagues who I can see have joined from a policy background and the particular asks there, we're very keen to follow those up with you too, and what we can do to support you. So thank you very much for that. I really do appreciate it. We've just got a few more minutes to be able to respond back to some questions, and I'm very grateful for those of you that have pasted those in. First of all, from Emma Flynn, Emma's asked, could we elaborate on what's included in the initial assessment, Mandy? I think this is something that you referred to before, your initial assessment, and maybe you've got some background you could give us there on your initial assessment process, please.
Yeah, the initial assessment is carried out by ASIS, the service that I referred to earlier from Bolton. That has a number of sort of aspects to it, one of whom is like a behaviour one. It looks at well-being, a well-being indicator to see whether children have concentration, whether or not they're engaged in learning, and so on. So that's the first thing that happens. And then depending on the language of the children, so if they are they have very little English, then they will see have they got any basic numbers or understanding of number, any basic conversational English, colours, simple words, so that at least when they come to us, we've got some idea of where they are in terms of language, and also do they have a good understanding of number, because very often, yes, the children can't speak English, but often they're maths geniuses. Sometimes we've just got 2 little boys come to us this week, and that's exactly the case. Can't speak a word of English, but can sit and do the maths. So that's, you know, that's important to us that we know that immediately, so that we're not putting a glass ceiling on those children before they even start with us. And then when they come to do the intervention, we do a similar sort of thing with us. We'll do an intervention as well, an assessment within that intervention, looking at, you know, are they able to write? What are they able to do in that regard? So it's quite a slow process, but it does give us a starting point.
Thanks, Mandy. And Catherine, I don't know if you're aware of any particular resources that are out there as kind of template assessment, initial assessment resources that can support schools in that regard.
Yeah, I think one, actually, the Bell Foundation, who is the EAL organisation that happened to just fund the research that we did. In the course of that, we became particularly familiar with a lot of their initial assessment tools. They're really, really helpful, and they are increasingly developing tools that are specifically designed for refugee and asylum seeker new arrivals. So kind of go, like, you know, slightly broader than perhaps that like an ordinary pure EAL assessment tool might do. So I would definitely recommend looking at their website and checking out the kind of increasing breadth of assessment tools that they have there.
Great, thank you very much. Elaine's asked about whether we can share a little bit more about an approach to differentiating between EAL and SEND needs. Mandy and Catherine, you both talked a little bit about that. Catherine, maybe if I come to you first, do you have any particular advice on how to differentiate?
Yeah, it's such a hard one. I feel like, you know, for the last decade, a recurring message from SEND experts and EAL experts has been like, this is just so hard because things are not seen, and things that are SEND are written off as language issues or mental health challenges, and vice versa. And it's really tricky to pull out. I think NALDIC has done some interesting work on this. I think I read a paper on it like a few weeks ago, but the detail of it is now escaping me, but I do remember thinking, oh, that's really interesting. There's a piece of research that we're doing at the moment as well for Oxfordshire County Council, which is tracking the experiences of different groups or different cohorts of refugee and asylum seeking children through the education system across the county. So looking at the experiences of Ukrainian children versus asylum seeking children versus Afghan resettled children, etc., etc. And one of the cohort groups that we're specifically looking at are refugee children with SEND. And so I am hopeful that in about 6 months' time, we'll have a lot more to say on that isn't just anecdotal than we do now, because at the moment, pretty much our experience is just, yes, it's a real challenge, and we empathise, and we don't have answers. I made a note as Mandy was speaking to say, ask Mandy what that assessment is, because I haven't come across it, and I'd love to hear about it, because it sounds like something we should be recommending.
I've got the name of that here.
Amazing. Yes.
It's called CAML, and that stands for Cognitive Assessment of Multilingual Learners. Now we're only just buying that because we need something, because of the increasing numbers of these children coming with SEND issues as well. So that's something we've just purchased. So I can't tell you much more about it, but that's come recommended to us. CAML, Cognitive Assessment of Multilingual Learners.
Mandy, you don't happen to know if it includes a kind of trauma lens, do you?
I don't, unfortunately, but I can find that out.
Thank you.
Thanks to you both for that. Amir's asked a question. Amir, good to see you there, about the fact that many refugee parents lack the language skills or resources to support children's learning at home in the same way that other parents might be able to do so. And he wondered to ask how schools and communities can bridge the gap to ensure refugee children receive consistent support outside schools. Mandy, maybe you've got some thoughts on that.
We do. We have homework clubs for that reason. So we have 3 different ones running in school each week that run from 3:15 till 4 o'clock. And all our homework is done on Seesaw, which is an online platform. And we've got iPads and things here that the children can work on. So any child, whether they're refugee, EAL, white British, whoever it might be, because of the levels of deprivation, they're all able to come and do their homework in school using the devices that we've got. supported by staff who are running the homework clubs. And you're absolutely right, that's part of our issue. Many of our families who can speak English, I'm thinking of one dad in particular that we've got, the Somali dad, who's fantastic, really engaged, wants the children to do well, but can't read and write in his own language. And so it's so difficult for them. So we try and support them wherever we can. And that's one of the ways we do that, through our homework clubs.
Thanks very much. I'm just very mindful of time because we promised to be done by 5 o'clock and we're already over. So I can see there's a number of different questions that are there in the chat. If we're not, well, we won't be able to answer all of them now, but what we'll do is we will come back to you directly with different responses to them, if that's okay. So maybe just though to wrap up, there's a point about you that Catherine referred to about support for school staff. Maybe Catherine Ansley just asked a question about what's the most important support you think we can provide for school staff and the biggest priorities there. Maybe just to concluding on the questions, you might both give us a little reflection on priorities for supporting school staff, please. Sorry, Mandy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, this is really difficult. As I say, we try to provide training. ACEs do provide training as well, but which our teaching assistants have accessed, because it's they who deliver the intervention that we have. It sounds awful, but we try not to put too much pressure in terms of data. We understand that, you know, in one class, for example, that might have 5 or 6 international new arrivals within a term, the data is not going to look great. It isn't. And people have to be reassured that we will look at it, you know, we'll look at the data without those children, with those children. They need to know that from the top, from senior leadership, that it's not going to be used as a stick to hit them with, really. We understand the challenges. And so we do everything we can to support putting in, as I say, the teaching assistants, trying to get these diagnostic tools and different resources, learning from best practice. We try and keep up to date as much as we can to support the staff, because, as I say, this isn't going to go away. We're living in a context here that's going to be a revolving door for many years to come, I'm quite sure. And it's just the way we live. And to be honest, it's just what we do, basically. So the staff, I have to say, I'm very proud of what my staff do for those children.
Thanks, Mandy. Catherine, about in your experience in terms of supporting staff, did you have anything further you think ought to be a priority?
I think one thing that a few of our partner schools have introduced, which has seemed to be really effective in terms of staff wellbeing, is just introduced a sort of a support drop-in for staff. So this is in schools where they have a kind of mental health focal point, who previously was geared towards providing direct support for children and young people, but has integrated into their role, kind of recognising the impact of vicarious trauma and just the challenge of trying to meet so many different needs all at once. Just a kind of once a fortnight they have, or whatever, different schools on different frequencies, but a support session, peer support session for staff, but within the presence of that trained mental health professional where they can process as well. That's been great. I think although this is organised by us, I would say, like, join our network, because then recognising what Mandy said about not wanting to put too much pressure on teachers, we've got a range of things, and different schools and have got very different circumstances. So what is most important for one school won't be most important for another. And I think the benefit of our network is that it is all of the stuff that is coming out of it. It's very new. This is the first month of it. Will be thematically organised, so teachers can pick and choose what they actually need and what's relevant to them. So I hope it might be of some help.
Thank you very much. That's really, really very helpful. Thank you. I just wanted to say that this webinar this evening was born out of some of the experiences that you both described in different ways of our practical accompaniment of support for schools, and to witness firsthand the challenges, but also the joys that refugee children can bring to a school and enliven the community. So it's really heartening, the work that you're doing, both in practical work in schools and the broader practical work of research and helping to understand the whole setting and context for it. So really grateful for you to be able to be with us this evening to share your insights. And I hope that tonight is just the start of further dialogue on this. And after the webinar, there will be an email coming out with resources that are on there that point towards different things, including Catherine's team and the resources that she's provided there. We will come back to the different questions directly, if that's okay, because I know that some of you reached out on there, and we'll download those questions and come back to you as quickly as we can with them. So I'm very grateful in advance to Mandy and Catherine if we can look at those and come back perhaps tomorrow to them. But I just want to give a heartfelt thank you to all the participants, speakers and organisers this evening for your invaluable contributions and this commitment that you have to promoting inclusive education for refugee children and unaccompanied asylum-seeking children is really inspiring. On behalf of Caritas Salford and the wider Caritas network, I'd really encourage you to take what you've heard today and consider implementing some of these strategies and resources in your own settings. And mindful that there's representation online from all parts of the country, I'd encourage you to reach out to your own local Caritas agency who might be able to assist or collaborate with you in welcoming and supporting, providing a welcoming and supportive environment where all children, regardless of their backgrounds, can thrive. In our own setting in Salford, we have a team of Caritas school social workers, counsellors and therapists. And if you want to reach out to our team too, we're more than pleased to receive any inquiries or indeed signpost you perhaps to a local agency if you're in one of the other diocesan boundary areas too. As I say, we'll be sending out a brief survey as well with the resources and really appreciate your input to help us understand and improve the learning for future sessions that will be accompanied by links to the free downloadable resources that are there. Again, please share your insights and any steps you take on social media using the hashtag welcoming classrooms, which helps us spread the word and inspire others. And not only that, I think from looking at the list of policy colleagues that are there, Catherine, I'm sure there's areas we'd like to collaborate with you on in the future too. Just a final word to say thank you again for everybody who's participated and to all the team who've contributed. We really appreciate your support and engagement in this really important issue. Thank you very much and have a lovely evening. Thank you.